Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our complimentary webinar series for U.S. federal government contractors. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. today. This webinar series will run for 15 weeks or on 15 Wednesdays as we cover subcontracting opportunities within each of the 15 federal departments. As usual, these webinars are all complimentary. You can find the schedule, registration links, and past recordings on our website under the subcontracting section. Our data partner each week is GovSpend, formerly FedMine, and our legal perspective will be covered by a rotating government contracts attorney each Wednesday. So a little bit about us. As you can see on the slide, we provide the following services for federal contractors, including product, service, and software firms across the globe. So you can find more information about us on our website. Our webinars and newsletters reach a vast array of federal contractors, and our YouTube channel now has almost 600 complimentary webinars, which we're adding to each week, of course. So please follow our channel and give our videos a like and a comment. We also offer advertising opportunities, including in this series right now. So if your organization is interested in reaching federal contractors, you can sponsor an event, our webinars, advertise in our newsletter, or have us post your promotional information on LinkedIn. So contact us at hello@jenniferschaus.com for pricing and our media kit and additional information. Please note we've added one more procurement playbook webinar. We just finished up our procurement playbook series in August, but we're having one on doing business with the NSA. This is going to be a live webinar only. It's not recorded. The slides won't be available afterwards. So this is definitely a rare opportunity, a great opportunity to participate, and our government speaker will be taking audience questions during this webinar. So we really hope you can join us. This will be on Friday, October 21st at 12 p.m. And also this Friday, September 30th, we're having a cybersecurity compliance and enforcement webinar for federal contractors with Arnold and Porter. This is also not recorded. This is a live webinar only as well. This Friday, September 30th, 12 p.m. You can find the registration information on our website. So definitely a great opportunity there. All right, and now we'd like to take a quick moment to thank the organizations that help make this series possible. We'd like to give a special thanks to Tom Johnson and the team at Set Aside Alert for posting this webinar series in their newsletter. Please visit setasidealert.com to learn about their services for small businesses. Additionally, we'd like to thank GovEvents and also Fairfax County for sharing this webinar series on their public calendars. So please visit their websites and calendars for other related events. And we'd like to thank the Virginia PTAC. Virginia PTAC is based out of GMU in Fairfax and offers free one-on-one counseling on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on your business location. So if you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided here to contact the PTAC. And also thanks to our friends at BidSpeed. The BidSpeed platform helps you win and increase your probability of winning government contracts. They have opportunities from every federal, state, and local public source in the United States. If you're looking for a compliance matrix, a proposal template, a strategic teaming partner, or details on an expiring contract, BidSpeed can help. BidSpeed is an official partner of the SBA's 7J Management and Technical Assistance Program. So contact BidSpeed at the email or phone number here to learn more. And next, we'd like to thank Gov White Papers, an online resource for content. Gov White Papers is a free knowledge hub for the public sector and supporting industries to find, post, and promote government and military-related content. Explore B2G advertising solutions with our team of expert government marketers so you can connect with public sector decision makers. Promotional opportunities include lead generation, display ads, white label content creation, email marketing, and more. Browse thousands of free white papers, ebooks, case studies, and more to stay informed on topics like energy, defense, economy, healthcare, technology, and education. Plus, upload your content for free to boost your website traffic and exposure in the government community. Join Gov white papers today to get started. And we'd like to thank C3. C3 Integrated Solutions is a full-service IT provider that specializes in securing our nation's defense industrial base through cloud-based solutions and industry-leading partners. C3 is a provider of Microsoft Government Cloud solutions, including Office 365 GCC, GCC High and Azure Gov, and specializes in helping clients achieve CMMC and NIST 800-171 compliance by providing MSP, security, and Office 365 integration services. No matter where you are on your compliance journey, C3 can help. Get compliant and stay compliant with C3 Integrated Solutions. And lastly, we'd like to thank WorkPlan. Manage contracts, compliance, and costs without the complexity. WorkPlan is a must-have for businesses serious about growing in the government contractor space. WorkPlan is a cloud-based ERP system with completely integrated product accounting, contract billing, and time expense, eliminating the need for multiple systems and spreadsheets. WorkPlan is user-friendly and offers robust functionality and DCAA compliance. Advanced modules include contract budgeting and forecasting, project management, earned value, incurred costs, ICE schedules, capture management, customer relationship management, and more. Call us at 866-826-3399 or email us at contactus@workplan.com to schedule a demo today. All right, so today we're here to dig into subcontracting opportunities at the Department of Energy. So let's just take a quick look at our agenda. As you can see, we're going to start with panelists, introductions, and we'll close out with legal insights today. So our first panelist today is Ms. Archisa Meehan. She's representing GovSpend. GovSpend is the go-to resource for finding federal contracting opportunities. So please contact Archisa for more information about the GovSpend platform. Thank you, Archisa, for being with us as always.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And our legal speaker today is Kevin Pomfret of the law firm Williams Mullins. Thank you, Kevin, for being with us.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
All right. So let's kick this off with a quick look at the mission statement from the Department of Energy. The mission of the Energy Department is to ensure America's security and prosperity by addressing its energy, environmental, and nuclear challenges through transformative science and technology solutions. So we always just like to put the mission statement out there. It's important to really study this so you know exactly what this department is trying to accomplish, especially with their procurement. All right, and let's just take a quick look. Here's the various agencies and services within the department. We encourage you to spend some time on each of the services websites to learn about their specific roles and missions as well. And then as always, check out these links. We have the link to the main department website as well as the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. And then it's important to look at that procurement forecast and the SBA scorecard as well, because then that can help you understand the small business contracting trends and what dollars are being won by women, veterans, hub zone firms, and other disadvantaged businesses. All right, so let's take a quick look at the top 10 vendors for the Department of Energy. There's the first 5 and 6 through 10. So I won't go through these because Archisa is going to go through the top 5 vendors in more detail. So I'll let her go on with that.
Perfect. So let's go to the next slide. So my name is Archisa Meehan, and I'm sure many of you, I've spoken on a few of these before. So I'm the director of federal at GovSpend, which supplies the best of state local education data, as also with the acquisition of FedMine, we now provide both federal and state SLED information. So we are specifically in this case focusing on what is happening in terms of what are the subcontract opportunities that are possible within agencies, specifically with the companies that have the prime contract. As we go through some of the slides, you will see some data, which is, the prime contract data is coming from FPDS, which is the central repository of all federal contract information. But we also pull in the subcontract information, which comes from USA spending. Just so that the subcontract data is coming from FSRS, which is, so it's self-reported. There is another portal called ESRS where the prime contracts that have a subcontract requirement will report information there. Now, unfortunately, ESRS information is not made public, but hopefully that changes in the future. So I always like to sort of talk a little bit about where our data is coming from. The other thing that as we go through these slides and the companies, we want to keep in mind, how can we as a small business understand the types of contracts that a company has and use that as we talk to the primes and try to create those prime sub relationships, teaming relationships, or even joint ventures. So the first company that we are going to talk about is looking at National Technology and Engineering Solutions of Sandia LLC. So let's go to the next slide. Here is the contact for the Small Business Liaison Office, or where you can register as a small business. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the company, the specific company that's identified by its unique SAM, unique entity indicator. Interestingly, Sandia began in 1945 as Z Division, and then it became Sandia Laboratory in 1948. And as you can see in one of the previous slides, it's now part of Honeywell. The only contracts that this organization has is from the Department of Energy. And you can see, it's been around the 3.7, 3.8, went up in FY21 to 4.2, and in FY21, as of last week, the prime contracts the company has received is $4.1 billion. Yeah, that's right. Okay. The contract award really is for the management of the Sandia National Laboratories. And of course, the place of performance for this is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Let's go to the next slide. Typically, you can see these are the subcontracts that they have received from the various companies, which include L3Harris, Consolidated Nuclear Security, John Hopkins, Triad. So it's a nice mix of companies that they have received subcontracts from. And when you look at the subcontracts that they've received based by agency, again, the Department of Energy is the main one that they are even doing some subcontract work with. So always keep in mind as you're talking to a company, as you're trying to understand the possible opportunities that are out there, you of course could also look at the subcontracts a company's won and get into the details to see if there is an opportunity even for you to work with the companies such as Triad or Ball Corporation. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Can you go back one slide? So one of the things that I would highly recommend is for those who might not have paid, it's so easy to miss some of the details, but if you're looking at the data, if you're looking at the specific prime contract information, there is always going to be a field if a subcontract plan is in place or if subcontracts are required. So when you look at the detail of any prime contract transactions, pay attention to and see if a specific contract has a subcontract plan requirement, because that again allows you to talk to the prime contractor and specifically talk about contracts that they have that have subcontract plan requirements that you could possibly work on. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Let's go to the next company, which I believe is Triad National Security. Next slide. This is their website, and next slide. So again, with Triad, the Department of Energy is their main client. They've done a little bit of work with GSA, but as you can see, it's really Department of Energy. At about $3.9 billion for the last FY22 and FY21. Place of performance again for this is in New Mexico at Los Alamos. Next slide. In terms of the subcontracts that they have received, you could see that on the right side of the screen. They've received some subcontracts from Applied Research Associates, Johns Hopkins, as also the University System of New Hampshire. And what is interesting when you look at this is that you could see that the work that they've received the subcontracts for are to be done at DTRA and the Department of the Navy. On the left-hand side, you can see actually some of the subcontractors that they have reported in FSRS, which feeds into USA spending. Again, you can definitely get into details of the subcontracts that they've awarded to the other companies, and also understand when does that prime contract expire, so you could go in further to create those relationships with the companies, with the prime. So this is for Triad. You could see not only the subcontracts that they have received that have been reported, as also some of the subcontract work that they have reported also. So always interesting to look at that and create your strategies. And of course, the information sometimes is really detailed, sometimes it's not, but since at least in the FedMine Government platform, we managed to link our subcontracts to the prime contracts at the task order level, you definitely can get a lot more detail. So next slide. This is further, I actually saw on our company profiles that they have received some grants too at NIH, which I found interesting, which is why I've mentioned it here. And you could sort of see it's the work that they're doing on the grant side is a little different and interesting. So again, this is more for information. Next slide. The third company that we're going to talk about, and of course, given the fact that this is Department of Energy and the prime contractors do very specific work. So the next company that we're going to talk about is the Lawrence Livermore National Security Company, LLC. Next slide. Here is the link for you to register and get information on the Small Business Liaison Office. Next slide. So again, with this company, Department of Energy is their main client. As you saw, all of them have seen a little bump in FY21 compared to the previous years. And this, their contract again is in, the place of performance, I'm pretty sure is Albuquerque, and it's management and operation of the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Let's go to the next slide. Again, you can see that they have received some subcontracts that have been reported. Again, you will see Johns Hopkins, I think we've seen in the previous two companies too, as also Triad National Security as a prime giving subcontract work to other organizations. For Lawrence Livermore, the Department of Energy is where most of the subcontract work is, along with NASA. And in terms of place of performance for the subcontract work that they've received, again, you can see they're doing work in California, Tennessee, and New Mexico. So next slide. And they again have some grants. In this case, it is with NASA for the International Space Station work. So again, always interesting to see the companies, organizations that can also have grants. And again, I think that does present an opportunity even to work as a sub to grants, to the best of my knowledge. But next slide. So the fourth company we're going to talk about is Consolidated Nuclear Security. Next slide. Here is the link to the company where you can find more information about their small business program office. Thank you. Their main work is with Department of Energy. Place of performance is at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And this is, again, for operating the National Security Complex Pantex plant with an option for the Savannah River operations. Next slide, please. Again, they have actually done some reporting of their subcontractors, which is what you could see on the left-hand side of the screen, where they've given some work to Bechtel National, Missouri Valley, Teledyne, as also Chicago Bus System. And then on the right-hand side, you could see that in FY 19 and 20, they received some subcontract work from the Triad National Security Company. So next slide. And the last company that we're going to talk about is UT Patel. Again, this is a specific organization. You know, when we are talking about companies, we're talking about the specific organization that has one or is one of the top 5 within an agency. So next slide. Here is the link to register and find information about their small business offices. Next slide. So this one, you know, you can see that the Department of Energy, again, is their main client. And it is really for the operation of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Next slide. In terms of the various NAICS codes, then, you know, a couple of the others that we saw had research and development as primary NAICS code. This one specifically is for facility support services. Next slide. And this one was interesting in that they did receive quite a few subcontracts from companies which include Jacob, Triad, of course, Georgia Tech, and Applied Research Associates. In terms of the subcontracts by NAICS codes, you could see that facility supports along with engineering services are your top 2 NAICS codes. Subcontract awards by agency, again, you could see it's mainly at Department of Energy, but you also, in this case, see they're doing subcontract work at DARPA and the Department of Army. Next slide. And that brings us to the end of our overviews of the top 5 companies at the Department of Energy. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me directly. Thank you. Madeline, back to you.
Thank you, Archisa, for all the data and, of course, your insights and your time. We really appreciate having you here. As she said, you can email her directly. We'll have that email again at the end of the presentation. So now we're going to just quickly go through some marketing best practices. We listed the basics for marketing your services to the top primes. Most importantly, you should use the tools available on sam.gov or the GovSpend platform to conduct research on the primes and expiring contracts. Use the primes website, their newsletter and events calendar, as well as their social media. Learn more about them, learn everything you can about them, and then connect with them. It's really important to do that background research. And then lastly, set yourself apart and lead with your capabilities, not your socioeconomic status. So bring a specific opportunity to the prime and work with the SBLOs, the small business liaison officers. They're your advocates. So we had all of those links in there for you to contact the top primes. So now we're going to move over to legal considerations and best practices. Please note that we've covered the federal acquisition regulations on the Department of Energy earlier this year. So there's the link for the YouTube recording. You can also get to it from our website or just our YouTube channel in general. So now I'm going to pass it over to Kevin.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and I always enjoy listening to these programs. I learn something every time that I listen in. So, and that was no exception today. So, thank you for the presentations. My name is Kevin Pomfret. I'm an attorney with a law firm of Williams Mullen. For those of you who don't know Williams Mullen, we're about a 300-person law firm. Our headquarters is in Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia, and we have offices between Tyson's Corner, where I'm located, down to Columbia, South Carolina. And our government contracting practice is primarily based out of our Tyson's office here, and then also down in our Virginia Beach and Norfolk offices. I do want to say that just a disclaimer that you probably hear whenever you hear lawyers talk, that this isn't legal advice. This is, if you do want legal advice, certainly reach out to a lawyer, including myself or other lawyers, but it's just meant to be sort of general, indications and or general background information for you to consider as you move forward. And just a little bit about me. I am a former satellite imagery analyst with the U.S. government that went to law school, and I work with a wide range of companies, including government contractors and corporate transactional issues on a variety of matters, including government contracting. Next slide, please. So the way that I start in reviewing any sort of agreement, whether it be a government contract or whether it be a a commercial agreement of any time, or any type, I generally sort of look at all the different legal documents or considerations that I need to keep in mind as I begin my review. And first of all, so in something like this, the first thing I would consider is the subcontract itself. It's important for both the lawyer and the client to read and understand that. That isn't always the case, but that it's done, but it is important to really go through and read and understand that, because it is a contract, it is a legal agreement. Oftentimes, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, another slide, there's a discussion, there's reference to the prime contract, or in some instances a solicitation. If that's the case, it's important to be able to review that. Sometimes it can get some pushback from the prime on getting the prime contract, but if it's going to be included in your subcontract, then you will want to review it. Because this is a federal contract with the federal government, federal laws will apply in a lot of instances, so it's important to understand those, including, as I'm sure most of the folks on this call are familiar with, the federal acquisition regulation and understanding how those work, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Then there are FAR supplements that different agencies have, including the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy is the Department of Energy Acquisition Regulation, or DEAR. So that's another thing as I go through a document as a subcontracting with the Department of Energy, I would keep in mind. I list executive orders because increasingly over the past few years, executive orders are something that the White House has issued, and things that traditionally maybe in the past would have been done by law through Congress. And so in some of the areas that I'll talk about in a little bit, that's important to keep in mind as well. And it seems to be increasing. And so just sort of in my mind as I go through it, I keep that in mind. And then also applicable state laws. So this is an agreement, a subcontract is an agreement between two commercial entities. So we need to understand what state law applies. Yes, there will be some federal overlay on top of it, but there will be questions around state law, what venue, what issues that may apply in a contract. So that's sort of the background that I have as I go through this process. Next slide, please. So after I do that, I then try to think about, okay, what are the risks? What are the major business and legal risks that the client may have in the agreement? I've got sort of the body of the legal issues or the legal documents. What are the issues? And the first one is, and these will vary. These risks will be either business risks or they could be legal risks. And they will vary depending on a number of factors. So it could be the nature and size of the contract or the parties involved, the nature of the parties involved. As a lawyer, you don't want to raise every little thing. You want to make sure that you focus on what are the major issues. And then maybe there are a bucket of other ones that are small, and depending on where your client is, whether you have leverage, how important this contract is, you may want to raise those as well. But it's first important to identify what the major risks. So there are the risks associated with a contract. So this might be what happens if one of the parties doesn't perform. What if you don't perform? What if the other party, the prime, doesn't perform? One that I will talk about in a little more detail are risks associated with intellectual property. Understanding that is going to be critical, and how that's addressed in the subcontract is going to be very important. And then I tried to think about, okay, what are the risks associated with failure to comply with federal law or the FAR in particular? What could the impact be for the subcontractor if it didn't comply with a flow-down provision from a FAR? And often cybersecurity is an example in terms of what that looks like and what requirements, what would happen if you aren't able to comply with the cybersecurity requirements, or if you say you can and you don't. And that's an important conversation to have with the subcontractor. The next are costs associated with compliance. For many subcontractors, that's already built in. But for folks that are new to the process, maybe new dealing with the Department of Energy, if there are costs associated with complying with a subcontract and the terms, making sure that they're aware of that and they're prepared to endure those costs or to put those costs into the pricing or into their own budget process. So that's something to think about. And then, and I actually heard this phrase I thought was interesting. It's something that I do a lot of teaching. And so I don't quite say it this way, but third-party interpretations of subcontracts. So, I tell my students, when you're drafting documents, you've got this sort of tension between making it as simple as possible, but also covering all the important items and make it clear as possible as well. And one of the things I like to think about is if you're not going to be the person interpreting the provisions, so if there's a change in the contracting officer at the government agency, or if there's a new lawyers involved, or if it were, God forbid, to go to court, do you want to rely on the interpretation or what was left out and what was intended to a third party to decide? If you don't want that, if there's a risk associated with that, you want to make sure that it's included in the agreement, and that can go both ways, both an affirmative obligation or a protection that you have. So that's sort of the second major items or list of things I think about as I begin a review of a document of a subcontract, whether I'm drafting it or negotiating it, analyzing and negotiating it on behalf of a client. Next slide, please. So as I said, the first thing is to understand the terms of the subcontract. What is required? Understand what the definitions are. A lot of times there'll be defined terms, and those will often reference the prime contract. So you have to go back and do that. And that's partly the job of the lawyer for sure, but it's also important for the business and the client to be able to do that as well. That also includes reviewing the statement of work and making sure that that's accurate and that's complete. Something hasn't been put in that doesn't apply, or something has been forgotten. And again, that's a responsibility of both the subcontractor and the lawyer to the extent that it's applicable. And then you want to understand what provisions can be negotiated. And we'll talk about this in the next slide a little bit about what flow-down provisions are mandatory and what aren't. But assuming that they're not, there are provisions that are negotiable. The prime contractor, or the person you're dealing with, may say that there's very little room to negotiate, But there are often a number of provisions that do end up being negotiable. Intellectual property rights, for instance, is something where you often have discussions around who has what rights, particularly what rights the prime contractor gets, rights to terminate, the dispute process, the venue, what state laws applies. There's a number of provisions that you can negotiate in many instances, and being able to understand what those are is really important. Sometimes, some would say more than sometimes, a prime may overreach in some of the sections. As I said, most often we see this with regard to intellectual property rights. So it's important to understand what intellectual property rights you have, what is required under the prime contract for you to give to the government, and what rights the government, in general gets. And that's an increasingly important issue that can be negotiated during the contract review. And so it's important to sort of not just, understand the flowdown provisions, but also just understand that provision as well. Next slide, please. So I expect that most of you are familiar with the FAR and the FAR supplements and the flowdown provisions. Oftentimes a subcontract, there are several different ways that a subcontract may reference the FAR provisions. They can be quite lengthy. They can be, difficult to if you're not familiar with the process, they can be difficult to understand and figure out which one applies and what they mean. It's important to note that even if it's listed in the subcontract, it may not necessarily apply to your circumstance. The contracting officer may have included by mistake, or the prime contractor may have simply flowed down without going through the process of figuring out whether those flow down provisions apply to you or not. So it's important you to keep that in mind. And there may be several reasons why they might not apply. The contract type. So for instance, if it's a fixed price contract, there may be certain accounting or pricing FAR clauses that don't apply. The size of the contract, there are certain thresholds that certain thresholds that must be met for certain clauses. And if you're below that threshold, it wouldn't apply to you. Some are the contract, the type of contract it is as well. So if it's a commercial contract or a contract for commercial items as compared to non-commercial items, there are certain provisions that wouldn't apply. And as I said, sometimes those will show up in a subcontract either by mistake or laziness. So it is worth going through the process and making sure that you understand which of those apply. And if they don't apply, it's good practice to take them out. Some would suggest that you can. The prime may suggest, and some would suggest that maybe you keep them in there. If they don't apply, they don't apply. But it's good practice to take those out for a lot of reasons. And I won't go into all of them now, but that's just a good practice to do. It's also important to understand if a flowdown provision in a FAR, if it does apply, if it's mandatory or if it's discretionary. And you can usually tell that by reading the FAR itself, if it's a mandatory provision. So that might be, as I said, if there are audit rights or flexibly priced contracts that are above a certain threshold, then those would be mandatory requirements to be put in there. Or there are certain ones that reference specific federal laws regarding employment and wage considerations, so they would apply as well. If it's not mandatory, then there is greater room for the subcontractor to negotiate those terms, either to have them stricken or to negotiate and make them less onerous or more favorable for the subcontractor. Next slide, please. So finally, I did want to sort of touch on what I often come across when in reviewing subcontracts. Some of the major issues that arise, and I've mentioned a couple of times intellectual property rights, and I do find that to be something that causes a great deal of confusion and uncertainty. It's important, as I said, to understand what rights the government is getting in your intellectual property, and you can find that when you're looking at the solicitation, they'll often say what rights they're looking for. There's also FAR provisions that apply. Depending on whether the intellectual property was created using government funding or private funding. If government funding is used, they get greater rights than if it was private funding. And if it's a purely commercial off-the-shelf product that is been generated from private funding and the government is only getting rights to use that, then they would have even less rights. There are certain provisions that need to be included in a commercial license agreement for intellectual property because it is the federal government. But in general, most of the provisions in your commercial license can apply, and so it's important to sort of understand that. It's also, this applies to patents as well. There's a body of law around of patents and what government rights in patents and your right to patent, and if you patent within a certain time period. So it's important to sort of keep that in mind as well, if that's applicable to what you're doing and what you're developing. And as I said, that because this prime contractor is in the middle, you want to make sure that the prime contractor, one, doesn't get any more rights than it deserves or is required to get under the contract, and you want to make sure that it's faithfully, put the right provisions in there with respect to the prime contract itself. And just another note on intellectual property rights that I think is important is, one, as I said, your rights with respect to the government really depend on how the funding takes place or where the funding comes from, and it's really important for you to be able to distinguish in your development and for your technical folks to be able to distinguish in the development, documenting whether private funds or government funds were used. And similarly, it's important to, when you do transfer intellectual property to the government through a prime, to document that very carefully and to make sure exactly what rights you're giving to the government. Don't just rely on the contract itself. It needs to be included in the documentation that you give with the intellectual property rights. So that's something to keep in mind. Cybersecurity is an area that's growing increasingly important, as I'm sure all of you know. Certainly, Department of Energy, that's an important area for them. There's so many overlapping requirements, not just in the contract itself, but with different agencies putting different requirements, and the executive orders that are dealing with cybersecurity. It's one that I think you need to pay particular attention to. One, both in terms of what's in the agreement itself, but then two, what other policies might apply either directly or indirectly for yourself and for the prime to make sure that you can comply with those. And again, a contract that maybe is a few years old, or prime contract if a few years old, may no longer be valid, and you want to make sure you understand that. And then your use of subcontractors. What provisions do you need to flow down to your subcontractors? Can you even use subcontractors? Are there any limitations on who you can use, that either from a contractual standpoint or otherwise? And what provisions do you need to protect intellectual property? What provisions do you need to make sure that they comply with cybersecurity? Are just two of the examples that you need to think about as you start to use subcontractors. And so when you're reviewing an agreement and you're looking at what you're going to be doing, in the back of your mind, if you're going to have your own subcontractors, you need to keep that in mind as well. What can't you do, and what must you and can you flow down to your subcontractors? And that's and next slide. I think that's it. So thank you, and yeah, if you have any questions, my email address is here, as well as Artisha. So thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for all of your great legal insight. We really appreciate that. Like you said, if you have any questions, there's his contact information as well as Artisha's email. So thank you for participating. The recording and slides will be available about 24 hours after the webinar, usually even sooner though. So the slides will be on slideshare.net, and the recording, as always, will be on our YouTube channel. And we look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be digging into the Department of Education. So this concludes the webinar. Have a great day, everyone.